in some ways, I think Goodhart's law is responsible for like ruining quite a bit of our experience of the web. If you go back to like the very original web, which wasn't good, but it was fairly honest.
So let's kind of nail down what is Goodhart's law. What is proposed in this observation of human behaviour?
Yeah, so Goodhart's law is really, simply put, is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. As a small aside, it's also a good example of why Sketchplanations is not really about the sketch; it's about the idea, because it's not a great sketch, but it just gets across the point so well, and it's been one of the most popular ones that people keep coming back to.
Is it?
Because it's such an interesting law? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they've been like reshared on Twitter and things like that.
If you put Goodhart's law into Google, Sketchplanation is very top. Absolutely the first thing you see.
Well, that's it. I mean, I'd never heard of it before. It's quite interesting. It was a little known, I would say.
So what is the sketch? Let's explain that.
Yeah. So the sketches. It was really, when I was reading about it, there were a few examples that were given, and the most common one was this one about, I think it was a nail factory, and if you got some central planners trying to optimize for getting as much productivity out of this nail factory as possible, they said, okay, well, we're going to measure people on the number of nails that's made. And then, of course, what you get was people delivering thousands and thousands of teeny tiny nails, because they all count, because that's what you're being measured on. And so they're like, right, we'll change it up, and we'll measure it on weight of nails, because then you can't stitch us up like that. And then, of course, they got a few giant heavy nails, which are also no use at all. So that's the example, and it just like it's kind of absurd. I'm sure it's fictional, but it kind of gets across the point that, of course, if you're going to be measured on that, you're going to figure out a way to make it work for you.
And the phrase that's used a lot about making it work for you is gaming that target, right? Gaming that deliverable.
That's a kind way of putting it, maybe.
Yeah. But I like it because it comes back to this trait of human behaviour. Because these targets are made for you build a target like that for something that wasn't sentient, right? For something that is a machine that can't think outside of the parameters that it's been given, whereas we're humans and we're going to try and do the best for ourselves as we possibly can. And so if you're incentivized by that target to do something to game it, then you're going to do that.
Yeah, I think the other example that really sticks with you, just making it so clear, was about, I think it was measuring like fitness of kids in cities, and they gave them all pedometers, and they were impressed about how much these kids were running around. Of course, they found they'd stuck it on the dog. Because that's what you're being measured on. So yeah, that's it. You'll figure out a way to game the measure, is basically Goodhart's law. And I think as soon as you start looking around, any time that a measure is a target, you sort of see that this really does happen.
And there are loads of examples that I've read about that are kind of, some of them are anecdotal and others are real examples. I mean, Tommy, have you any examples that you can think of or you know of Goodhart's law?
Yeah, I've got some sort of serious sort of business ones, but kids just make me laugh so much because they are the masters of gaming a rule. I'll never forget watching tennis, a group of kids playing tennis, and there's loads of balls around, and the coach goes, okay, whoever can get the most balls and bring them back to me wins. And one kid just ran straight to the bucket where all the balls were and poured them on the floor, and then picked them, poured them into his shirt. And the whole point of obviously the exercise was the coach wanted the balls picked up and put back, not the bucket emptied out into someone's shirt. And they were just so chuffed with themselves, this boy, like that.
But, supposedly the British colonial government in India in the early 1900s decided that there were too many loose cobras. I was going to say running, slithering around the streets of Delhi. So the government issued a policy offering a bounty for every dead cobra that was brought in to try and rid the streets and make them a safer place for the citizens of Delhi. And it worked for a while.
They started breeding cobras.
And they started breeding cobras. And so then the government decided, well, this is not working anymore. So they scrapped the policy. So then everyone who'd been breeding cobras just let them out into the streets because they were a danger to have a home. That's the cobra effect. That's one I read about.
I don't suppose you read about that on the Sketchplanations website.
Did I read about that on Sketch-Connect? Maybe I did.
I don't know. I don't know if you did, but there is a sketch explanation for the Cobra effect.
Have you done a sketch for?
Also, one of my.
Do you know what? I didn't
ones.
actually. I didn't read it there.
I think because I was thinking of it when you said about the tennis ball example, Tom. Because like all you want is the tennis balls in the bucket.
In the bucket.
And so you measure that, and they tip them out of the bucket. It's like
That is
boom. It's a great
balls, cobras.
There was
potato.
a great example of the Cobra effect I heard about in Bogota, where they were trying to reduce traffic, and so their idea was that you could only drive cars with a certain license plate on certain days of the week.
Oh yeah.
And so you could only drive on Mondays, Wednesdays this week, and Tuesdays, Thursdays are next week. And so what did people do?
They got extra cars.
They got extra cars.
Oh no!
Exactly. Well, of course you would. Yeah. So there's some great examples of the Cobra effect out there.
Aren't the likes of Instagram and Spotify and Google and TikTok and all this? Aren't they constantly trying to change or develop the algorithms so that they can be more reflective and so that they're not being gamed as much?
Goodhart's law is partly what gives you like clickbait titles, so people just click on it whether or not the article is good or not.
Click farms.
Yeah, people just clicking on stuff for whatever, emails with like subject lines that just draw you in, even if it's not great. And I think the original, like, I don't know if you guys were doing web stuff this year, but the original like page rank algorithms that Google was doing, right? So search engine optimization, SEO is all. It makes or breaks your business if you're at the top of the list. So everybody's trying to second guess what Google was doing, and I remember the days where you would put tiny text in exactly the same color as the background on the bottom of the page or on the top of the page, just so it was on the page, because it wouldn't really know. And then of course they have to then get more sophisticated and go, okay, well, the text has to be big, the text contrast has to be enough, but because they're trying to do this. And so everybody's like, they take one step, people figure out a way, they take another step, people figure out a way. I do have to say, generally I think my approach to this, and I would do it for the podcast too, is if you make good stuff, things will rise up. Like, you should do things in a respectful way. And I've always tried to do it with Sketchmanations. It's probably why it's not a massive commercial success. It's just an interesting project. But, like, if you try and just do stuff honestly, I think PageRank and stuff like that, or the way they're always trying to they're trying to find the good stuff. And so I trust as much as possible that they're going to figure out all the people trying to game it and mine go to the top, but maybe that's not the case. I'm
100% with you on this, with anything to do, anything not just on the web, so with the podcast, but with this podcast, but also with stuff generally. Just trust in what you're doing, and trust in yourself to do the best that you can, and let that be the incentive, and have faith that will rise if it is of decent quality.
Like some of the guidelines for articles is like, okay, this is how Google ranks stuff, like titles that reflect the content of the article, structured titles that help break up your article into readable chunks, interesting content that will help people stay on the page longer. And you're like, that's just writing a good article. And
Interesting content.
That's the idea of the whole. So in some ways, I feel like a lot of places, we've maybe got there, but probably a lot of places we haven't.
All music on this podcast series is sourced from the very talented Frank Cinelli. And you can find loads more tracks at frankcinelli.com.